Welcome to the right seat. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here for today's briefing. Today's lesson is all about taking you from someone who just, well, steers an airplane to an aviator who truly commands it. We're going to be mastering the airplane's secondary flight controls. These are kind of the unsung heroes of the cockpit. They're the systems that ensure we can fly safely at different speeds, different altitudes, and in frankly, all sorts of crazy atmospheric conditions. By the end of this explainer, you won't just know what these knobs and levers do, you're going to understand the actual physics of why we use them and exactly how to operate them with the absolute utmost safety. So let's just dive right into it. When you first step into the cockpit, seeing all those dials, levers, and red and black knobs, it can feel incredibly overwhelming. I mean, it looks complicated, right? But I promise you, it's really not. Every single switch and lever has a very specific logical purpose. Today, we're basically going to strip away all that complexity. We're going to focus on a few specific controls right there in the center console that dictate exactly how our wings interact with the air and how our engine breathes. By the time we finish up, you'll know exactly how to command these systems like a pro. Okay, here's our flight lesson plan for today. We'll start with a quick welcome to the cockpit. Then we'll cover flaps, lift, and drag. After that, we're going to learn how to beat carburetor ice, manage our mixture and fuel, and then wrap the whole thing up with some essential airman shit.
All right, Section 1, welcome to the cockpit. Let's get right to it and define what we actually mean when we talk about secondary flight controls.
You already know that the yoke and the rudder pedals are your primary flight controls, right? They make the airplane pitch, roll, and yaw. Essentially, they steer the plane. But the secondary flight controls? Well, these are the systems that alter your airplane's basic configuration. We're talking about the flaps on the trailing edge of your wings and engine controls like the carburetor heat and the mixture knob. While the yoke tells the plane where to go, these secondary controls are literally what allow us to operate safely across a massive variety of speeds, altitudes, and weather conditions. They heavily impact our lift, our drag, and our overall engine performance. Moving on to Section 2, flaps, lift, and drag. Let's transition our focus directly out to the wings, specifically to those flaps, which are absolutely critical for safe takeoffs and landings. Mechanically speaking, the flaps are attached to the inboard trailing edge of each wing, and when you operate the flap lever in the cockpit, these panels move symmetrically downward. Now, by extending them, you are fundamentally altering the curvature or the camber of the wing. In a very real aerodynamic sense, you're creating an entirely new airfoil right in mid-flight. This new shape completely changes the airflow, and that allows the wing to generate the required lift at a much longer airspeed. Honestly, this is the exact magic that allows us to fly slowly and safely during a landing approach. Let's contrast how the airplane behaves with a clean wing versus a flapped wing. When the flaps are up, the wing is clean, meaning it's optimized for cruising at higher speeds with really minimal drag. But when we lower those flaps, man, things change dramatically. We generally categorize flap extension into two phases. The initial stages of deployment are called lift flaps. They give us a massive boost in lifting ability, which is absolutely perfect for short takeoffs. But the larger flap settings, say pushing it from 20 to 30 or 40 degrees, those are called drag flaps. At those steep angles, you're getting very little extra lift, but a massive penalty in aerodynamic drag. And actually, that drag is incredibly useful when we want to steepen our descent path toward the runway without building up any dangerous excess airspeed. Now let's see how all this translates into our actual physical handling of the yoke. As those flaps are lowered, all that sudden change in lift and drag creates what we call a pitching moment. The airplane literally wants to balloon upward. And as a pilot, you can't just let the plane fly you have to fly the plane. You have to anticipate this ballooning effect and actively counteract it with forward pressure on the control column, just to maintain your desired flight path. And this brilliantly illustrates one of the greatest practical benefits of flaps from where we sit in the pilot seat. Because those extended flaps are creating so much extra drag, we actually need to fly with a significantly lower pitch attitude just to maintain our airspeed. And the result? That lower nose attitude gives you a dramatically improved forward view of the runway on your final approach. It lets you see exactly where you're touching down, making your landings so much safer and, well, a lot more precise. But, and this is a big but, here is where we absolutely must talk about strict airmanship and structural limits. Think about your airspeed indicator. You know that white band curving around the outside? That's your flap operating range. The high-speed end of that white arc is known as VFE, or maximum flap extended speed. Deploying your flaps when you are flying faster than VFE is a critical error. The sheer force of the wind hitting those deployed surfaces at high speed can severely overstress the metal hinges and the wing structure itself. It can potentially cause catastrophic damage. You have got to respect the white arc.
Because of these really strong aerodynamic forces, we have a very specific, strict procedure for operating flaps. You don't ever just dump them all at once. Step 1, you move them one stage at a time. Step 2, as you deploy that stage, you physically adjust the yoke to hold your desired pitch attitude, fighting that ballooning tendency we just talked about. And step 3, once your airspeed and attitude are stable, you trim the aircraft to relieve that pressure on the yoke. Doing this in stages prevents violent, sudden changes in our flight path and ensures a really smooth, professional approach.
All right, Section 3, beating carburetor ice. Let's shift our focus from the wings outside to the engine inside and introduce a silent, freezing killer: carburetor ice. So, inside the carburetor, fuel's mixed with air right before entering the cylinders. But physics kind of plays a trick on us here. The vaporization of that fuel, combined with low pressure on the carburetor throat, causes a massive sudden temperature drop. This means that even on a beautiful, warm 100-degree day, if the air is humid, the temperature inside the carburetor can easily drop below freezing. Ice will literally build up and completely choke the engine's air supply. The symptoms are terrifying if you aren't prepared. You'll see a slow, unexplained drop in RPM, a total lack of throttle response, a really rough running engine, and eventually total engine stoppage.
So how do we beat it? Well, we use the carburetor heat knob. When you pull this knob, it routes hot, unfiltered air from around the engine exhaust directly into the carburetor to melt that ice. But here is the totally counterintuitive physics lesson you need to remember. Hot air is less dense than cold air. So the exact moment you apply full carb heat, your engine's RPM will actually drop even further. Now don't panic, this is completely normal. If ice was present after that initial drop, the RPM will slowly rise back up as the warm air melts away the blockage. Once the ice is clear, you simply push the knob back to cold and your RPMs will surge right back to normal.
Okay, Section 4, mixture control and fuel. Let's move right next to the throttle to the mixture control. That's the distinct red knob that manages our engine's exact diet of fuel and air. Let me pose a direct question here, just to challenge some of your ground school assumptions. When you park your car, you turn the key, cut the ignition spark, and the engine stops, right? So why don't we do that in an airplane? Why is the procedure to shut down an aircraft engine entirely different? Well, the answer is that we shut down an airplane engine by starving it of fuel, not spark. By pulling that red mixture knob all the way back to the idle cutoff position, we completely sever the fuel supply to the carburetor. The engine just burns up the last few drops of gas in the cylinders and dies smoothly. Doing it this way ensures that there is absolutely zero combustible fuel left sitting in the fuel lines or the cylinders after we park. It's a vital, absolutely mandatory safety procedure to prevent accidental engine starts and drastically reduce the risk of an engine fire on the ground. But you know, the mixture control isn't just for shutting the engine off, it is also completely critical for cruising efficiency. As we climb to higher altitudes, the air becomes thinner, air density decreases. If we just leave the mixture knob pushed all the way in at full rich, the carburetor is still sending the exact same heavy amount of fuel, but it's mixing with much less air. The mixture becomes way too rich. This leaves unburned fuel in the cylinders, which fouls the spark plugs, causes rough running, and honestly just wastes a ton of expensive aviation gas. So as a general rule of thumb, when cruising above 5,000 feet, you must actively pull back or lean the mixture knob to optimize that fuel-to-air ratio for absolute peak performance. And finally, Section 5, Essential Airmanship. It's time to anchor all this mechanical and aerodynamic knowledge into practical, real-world flight safety rules. These are your golden rules of the cockpit. Seriously, memorize these. Number 1, never, ever exceed VFE with your flaps down. You have to respect the structural limits of your aircraft. Number 2, on a go-around or takeoff, ensure you are positively climbing and safely above 200 feet above ground level before you even think about raising your flaps. Number 3, always taxi with your carburetor heat full cold. The hot air bypasses the air filter, and trust me, you do not want to suck runway dust and gravel directly into your engine cylinders. And number 4, unless you're leaning for high-altitude cruise, always run a full rich mixture for normal low-altitude operations, takeoffs, and landings to ensure maximum engine power. Because at the end of the day, knowing how a system works is entirely useless if you don't know the safe procedure for using it. Which brings us to the end of today's briefing. We've covered the physics of how flaps generate lift and drag, how to command your engine's fuel-air mixture, and exactly how to safely melt away carburetor ice. You know the procedures, and much more importantly, you know the safety parameters. So the only question left to ask is this. Now that you actually understand the physics of flight and the unbending rules of airmanship, are you ready to respect the limits of this airframe and finally take the controls? Keep studying, stay safe, and I will see you in the sky.